Hello, I'm Roberta Winters, President of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township. Today, we are delighted to have with us Patti Barker. She and her husband Rick were the recipients of the League's 2017 Civic Participation Award. This was in recognition of the time and effort they spent with the Garrett Hill Coalition and the Garret Hill Steering Committee. They spearheaded the community group that worked over 2.5 years to develop the Garret Hill zoning district. As many of you know, land development in Radnor Township is dependent on zoning that sets the rules and regulations as to what can and should be built. Since this neighborhood has a rich history dating back to well before the American Revolution, the residents of Garret Hill worked together to craft an overlay district to maintain their unique neighborhood. Patti, while I live in Garret Hill area and attended many of the meetings that you had in the neighborhood, I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about how this effort originated and how it's evolved.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Roberta. In 2007, Radnor Township initiated a rezoning effort in the Garret Hill Business District. This was unbeknownst to the community. Once they heard about it, we literally stormed the township building. Great number of township residents went to the township building, and we demanded to be part of this rezoning process. If you were going to rezone our neighborhood, we wanted to be part of it. This was an unprecedented effort in the history of Radnor Township, had never been done before. It was at that point in time that the Garrett Hill Coalition was formed. And then I can go on and tell you the rest of the story. While the Garrett Hill Coalition was formed, Rick, my husband, was also made chairperson of the Garrett Hill Steering Committee. This was a committee that was appointed by the township once the residents made their voices heard. And the Garrett Hill Steering Committee worked with the community, Radnor Township staff, architect, planner, to craft zoning laws that would make sure that any future development would preserve the existing pattern of development and reflect our community values.
So, once the citizens set about having a voice in this process, how did their ideas get translated into something called zoning?
So as I said, Garret Hill Coalition was formed, Garret Hill Steering Committee was formed. Once the process officially began in, I'm going to say February of 2008, the Garret Hill Steering Committee met weekly. The Garret Hill Coalition's Executive Committee met weekly. All of these meetings were open to the public. We advertised them. We had flyers up in the neighborhood. So through those meetings and working with township staff, the planner, and the architect, these laws were crafted. The planner evidently gave us, a skeleton, and then we built on that. Charrettes were held for larger community groups where we would have various questions up on boards trying to quantify what were the zoning priorities, what were the most important things that the community wanted to preserve as we move forward with these zoning ordinances, writing of them.
This was a lot of work by a lot of people. So, as I recall, there was actually an area that was laid out that was called the Garret Hill Zoning District.
Yeah, it was actually called the Garret Hill Overlay District initially. And yes, I think that they're showing a picture of that on the screen as we speak. So yeah, that was the actual area of Garret Hill that was being rezoned. So it was Conestoga Road, the business district, Garrett Avenue all the way down to Emlyn-Tennell Field, and then on Conestoga, Clem-McCrone Park was also included. So it's kind of an unusual map, but that was the area. It went all the way to Rosemont Business Campus to the east, and on the west, Clem-McCrone was the ending of the overlay district. As things began to become more formalized, it was then termed the Garret Hill Zoning District.
Okay. And that was, again, there were actual ordinances and rules that were developed.
Correct.
And the Garret Hill Coalition, over time, after those rules and regulations were developed, it kind of faded into the background.
Right. So the zoning process took 2.5 years. We started in I'm going to say 2008. The Garret Hill Master Plan was approved. That was another piece of the project. The community, with the help of the planner and the architect, wrote an actual master plan that talked about what our hopes and dreams were, the things that we were looking for, and how we might go about affecting those things that people were hoping for. So that was passed in July of 2008. Then in October of 2009, the actual zoning ordinances were approved by the Board of Commissioners and made part of Radnor Township zoning law. Once they were approved and became law, the Garrett Hill Steering Committee was appointed as the Garret Hill Implementation Committee. So they were then tasked with implementing the Garret Hill Master Plan. The Garrett Hill Coalition then, once the zoning district was complete, we stayed alive and well. Villanova then came on the scene, where they were rezoning so that they could build their dorms and other things. So the coalition got very involved in that rezoning effort as well. That took us up to 2017. So once the Garret Hill zoning district ordinances were passed, and once the Villanova University CICD zoning was enacted, it became clear that the Garret Hill Coalition, our purpose had always been to preserve and protect Garret Hill, and it seemed like
you're doing a good job.
We were okay. So we decided that we would disband. It had always, even when we were formed, it was never supposed to be in perpetuity. It was there to help when the community needed help. So there was another arm of our organization called the Garret Hill Community Enhancement Trust. They were then tasked, when we disbanded, they continued, and their task is to help implement the Garret Hill Master Plan. And then the Bryn Rose Civic Association, which is our local community civic organization. So those two organizations continue to this day. Bryn Rose meets monthly. Garret Hill Community Enhancement Trust meets quarterly. So Garret Hillians' interests and concerns are still being paid attention to, but the coalition is no longer officially extant.
Well, I think our audience now knows why you and Rick deserve that Civic Participation Award, because it was quite a Herculean task that was done.
It was, but it was a Herculean task. Yes, we were the leaders, but it could not have happened without all of the members of the coalition, the steering committee, and our community, which, as you know, is a very active, involved, vigilant group of people.
Well, I know, Patti, in recent months I've seen you back at the Radnor Township Commissioners meetings.
Yes, indeed.
And there seems to be some problems with a property that was built on Garrett Avenue. What's going on there?
Okay, so I'm going to step back for just a minute. You've heard me say this before, but as you remember, Garret Hill zoning district ordinances were adopted by the Board of Commissioners, became Radnor Township zoning code in October of 2009. End results of a 2.5-year process, unprecedented effort. Literally hundreds of people participated. The goal of Garret Hillians was to preserve Garret Hill as we know it, to ensure development in keeping with that goal. So recently, a developer, David Brasso of DJB Builders, began building a duplex on Garrett Avenue. Now, this developer actually met with members of the community in June of 2015 and January of 2016. He initiated the meetings, stating that he wanted to build a building that would conform with Radnor Township zoning code, and he also wanted to be a good neighbor. He submitted a plan to us at that time. Initially, the first plan he submitted, there were problems with it. So we spoke to him, explained the Garret Hill zoning. He actually had it on the bottom of the plan. He actually knew what the Garret Hill neighborhood district was. He then submitted another plan to us in January of 2016, which conformed with the Radnor Township zoning ordinances, specifically as they relate to Garret Hill. This plan was well received by the community. We were very pleased. I was thrilled. I thought, when does it ever happen that a builder approaches the community where he's going to build a building to get their input and oversight? Then he disappeared off the face of the earth. He did not begin building the duplex until late 2018. I thought perhaps he had sold the property, that something had happened, financial issues. Well, in fairly short order, it became clear that the building was not in compliance with the Radnor Township zoning ordinances. And it became pretty clear that the building exceeded the height limitations delineated in the Garrett Hill neighborhood section of the zoning ordinances. So once again, community members stepped forward and alerted township officials to our concerns. Thus began a months-long back and forth process to determine and quantify the extent the building was out of compliance with our zoning code. Now, Rick and I believe it's out of compliance in a few different issues, but bottom line is the building exceeds the maximum height in the GHN zoning district by 6.5 feet. So that is the issue that is before us tonight at the BOC meeting and then at the zoning hearing board, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So.
Well, you know, my mother would call that a bait and switch. You know, you promise them one thing and you deliver something else. But I know the Garret Hill zoning codes were clear about the height because they're close to the road and we didn't want it to look like a tunnel. There were other restrictions about setbacks and impervious surface and all those things that we thought were important in keeping with our neighborhood. How do you think this all happened?
I'm going to say I think things fell between the cracks. The community was on alert. I felt, and I think those of us who met with Dave Brasso felt that when we had okayed the plan that he submitted, that once it got to the township, things would move along smoothly. And also our township officials, knowing how much we had been involved with the zoning, the writing of the zoning laws, they were going to pay attention. So somehow, we did meet with Mr. Brasso informally after the first planning commission meeting that they went to. But somehow, again, because I was no longer a bunch of, we used to attend all of the planning, zoning, and BOC meetings throughout the process and for about a year afterwards. So I'm going to say, one could say the community became complacent or we put our trust in our officials. I'll leave it at that. So I think what happened was the township approved what he submitted, but didn't notice, didn't remember that what the Garret Hill neighborhood zoning was. I can't truly quantify what happened because I wasn't in the township building. But in our meetings with Bob Z, Steve Norsini, talking to Kevin Kachansky, some mistakes were made. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I know, in recent years, taxpayers have always wanted the township to hold back any kinds of increases. And I think sometimes that means staff are not allocated that used to be allocated. They don't perhaps have all the time they need to do the job. I know we've had contractors and consultants in and here and there, and I'm sure that some of them are more or less familiar with the kinds of things that have happened in our community. And I really am amazed that it took the neighbors to actually alert the township officials that something was wrong.
Well, see, I would have agreed with you. But we, and I guess this is the part that I sort of beat myself up over, is that you'd think that based on our experience of 2007, 08, 09, but I felt because we had a change in township personnel, and I think very highly of our current township officials, but they were not part of our process. They were not here. They came on board afterwards. So again, we made assumptions that the laws would be followed, and somehow that didn't happen with regard to this particular building in every instance. In many ways it does conform, but there are, like I said, the most egregious is the building height, pardon me, so that's what we're focused on, is lowering the height.
Well, I think, we would hope this is an exception of how development happens in Radnor, not the rule. And I know some things are going to be happening now that hopefully will try to remediate the situation. I think one of the things that was along the way, wasn't there a stop work order issued at one point in time?
Yes, very briefly. Rick and I met with Bob Z and Steve Norsini back in March and reviewed all of our history of our interactions with Mr. Brasso. And of course, you have to follow the rules. You have to follow the process. So they weren't able to issue a stop work order right away. What they did do was meet with Mr. Brasso, tell him that he was out of compliance and that they expected him to submit, a way to correct this problem. He did submit 2 separate plans that were not accepted by the township. Then at that point, and I think it was at that point that they issued a stop work order. I forget the exact timeline. But once he talked to them, they said, that's what it was. They issued a stop work order when they met with him, and they said, you've got to correct this. So he said to them, can I continue working while I devise a plan? And they said yes. So the stop work order was only maybe 48 hours, if that. And then he presented his first plan, that was not accepted. He presented his second plan, that was not accepted. And then he sort of stopped presenting any more plans. So we, the community, kept following up with the township officials saying, you know, please do something about this. So then they finally filed a zoning enforcement notice. They mailed it to him. So then that didn't happen until June the 6th. He had 30 days to either bring the building into compliance or file an appeal. So he filed an appeal on July 2nd. So what I find most interesting is on the zoning enforcement notice, it says all work is to cease at this construction site. But when you read the fine print, it says, unless you comply within 30 days or file an appeal. So when they kept working, I called up the township staff. I go, it says
Stop working?
They said, no, 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 he has 30 days. So he kept building and building, and he continues to build.
So where are we now? Right now, what's happening?
Well,
I know it's hard to figure out, but...
Well, where we are right now is that he filed his appeal on July 2nd. He has the right to a hearing before the zoning hearing board within 60 days of him filing an appeal. So that date has been set. The zoning hearing board will hear his appeal on Thursday, August 29th at 7 p.m. at the Township Building. Tonight at the Board of Commissioners meeting, the board will vote on whether or not they will send the township solicitor to that zoning hearing board appeal to defend Radnor Township zoning law. In my mind, it's a no-brainer. You vote yes because it's Radnor Township zoning law. However, one of the things I have also learned throughout my 10 years of working with the township is just because you think it's a no-brainer doesn't mean it is. So I'm encouraging citizenry to show up tonight to say, please vote yes. It's imperative that you defend our Garrett Hill neighborhood zoning section of the Radnor Township zoning laws. So that's where we are right now.
Well, it sounds to me like, as you said, this is an ideal opportunity for citizens to get involved. And as you know, the League's purpose is to promote that political participation and responsibility and to be informed about what's happening in our community. So I'm sure we will be taking action, but because we believe the rules need to be followed, and when noncompliance becomes acceptable, we're really in big trouble. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share based on your work with this Garret Hill zoning district and the steering committees and the coalitions and the ways in which you've been involved in the situation?
Well, I think that the main thing is, I used to say during our process, fannies in the seats. Tell the story to any of the appropriate, the Board of Commissioners, the Zoning Hearing Board. So we are encouraging, again, Garret Hillians to come out tonight, but even more importantly, to come out Thursday, August 29th, 7 o'clock, because that's really where this fight is going to take place. Both Mr. Brasso and the township will have an opportunity to present their cases. They will each call witnesses. There will be a public participation portion of that meeting. I would encourage anyone who attends that meeting to get up and say, I'm very concerned about this development, this unwanted development, this out-of-compliant development that's happening in Garret Hill. I would encourage everyone to call, email their commissioners, the township staff, Bob Zinkowski, Steve Norsini, Kevin Kachansky. All of their email addresses and phone numbers can be found on the Radnor Township website pretty easily. Basically, it's their first initial and their last name at radnor.org as far as an email address. Call our 7th Ward Commissioner, Sean Farhi, email him, tell him you expect him to uphold the Garret Hill zoning district ordinances that were written through the blood, sweat, and tears of our community 10 years ago. I have spoken with our commissioner myself. I have said to him, I understand completely that zoning is fluid. It is not meant to be static. Hahowever, for this to be changed at this point in time is, or to even be thought about changing or allow this to happen is unconscionable. The community must be brought in to discuss this. So again, I encourage the community to step up, get your fanny in the seat, because we spoke clearly, firmly, and vehemently 10 years ago about what we saw the future of Garret Hill to be. There's a paragraph from the Garret Hill Master Plan that I'd like to read to you that I think speaks to our community. And this was quoted in both the 2008 Garret Hill Master Plan as well as the 2003 Radnor Township Comprehensive Plan. And they both spoke to the uniqueness of Garret Hill. So I quote, "Garret Hill is a wonderful community. The neighborhood's vibrancy and resiliency are rarely seen and experienced. These qualities make Garret Hill unique and worthy of special consideration to preserve it. The master plan focuses on strategic policy changes and capital investments needed to preserve the exceptional community resources of Garret Hill far into the future." Garret Hill is indeed a unique community, very unusual on the main line. So I speak from the heart when I say, please come out to these very important meetings. And if you can't be there, please communicate to your commissioner and the rest of the board and to our township officials how you feel about this. Thanks so much, Roberta.
Well, thank you, Patti, and I'd like to thank Radnor Studio 21 for this opportunity to share with you the history of the Garret Hill zoning district and the current challenges for this neighborhood. I am most appreciative of this audience who will hopefully understand how this situation is one where good government will be tested. After years of work, grassroots concerns of residents became translated into zoning ordinances that have legal implications. Now, a developer has built a non-compliant structure. Is this the thin edge of the wedge that will pry open all kinds of other encroachments? Who is accountable? How will this issue be resolved? Watch local government channels to see meetings live and on demand to find out what happens. In the meantime, let your voice be heard through letters, phone calls, and attendance, as well as comments at public meetings. This is an issue where it may take a village to make a difference. We hope you'll be part of that village. Thank you again.